Welcome, friend. Welcome to this threshold moment between the old year and the new. You have arrived here in this quiet space, and that arrival itself is enough. You need not bring anything with you. You need not be anything other than what you are right now, in this breath, in this body, in this moment of rest. The old year is fading behind you like footprints in sand at the tide's edge. The new year waits ahead, not demanding, not rushing, simply present like an open door. And here, between them, you can rest. You can let your shoulders drop. You can let your jaw soften. You can let the weight of becoming settle, just for now, into the simple grace of being. In the Buddhist tradition, every moment is a new beginning. Every breath is an opportunity to start fresh, to meet life with what they call beginner's mind, open, curious, unburdened by the stories of who we think we should be. The turning of the calendar is simply a reminder of what is always true, that we can begin again and again and again. Tonight's stories are longer, slower, richer. They will carry you through the hours of this sacred in-between time. Stories of monks greeting the first dawn of the year, villagers preparing their hearts for what comes next, wanderers discovering that every ending is already a beginning. Let these tales wash over you like water. If you drift into sleep before they conclude, that is perfect. Sleep is its own renewal, its own fresh start. And when you wake, whether in minutes or hours, you will find the new year waiting, patient and kind. So settle in now. Let your breath deepen. Let the world outside grow distant and soft. Trust that you are held, you are safe, you are exactly where you need to be. And let us begin. There was a monastery that stood on a mountainside where the air was so thin that clouds would sometimes drift through the courtyards like gentle visitors. The monastery was ancient, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain, its wooden beams dark with age and smoke from countless fires. It had stood through dynasties and wars, through seasons of plenty and seasons of want, and still it remained, patient and solid, a place where people came to seek what could not be found in the rushing world below. Among those who lived in the monastery was a young monk named Tenzin. He was 24 years old and had been at the monastery for 3 years, having arrived as a lost and searching young man who could not quite name what he was looking for but knew he would recognize it when he found it. He had shaved his head, taken his vows, and thrown himself into the practice with the fierce dedication of the newly converted. But lately, something had shifted. The initial fire of his practice had cooled, and in its place was something he did not recognize. Not doubt, exactly, but a kind of restlessness. He meditated each morning and evening as required, but his mind wandered. He studied the texts, but the words seemed flat, distant. He worked in the garden, swept the halls, chanted with the community, but it all felt hollow, as if he were performing the motions of devotion without touching its heart. On the last day of the year, Tenzin woke in the darkness of his small cell, the cold air biting at his face. He had not slept well. His dreams had been fragmentary and unsettling, full of doors he could not open and paths that led nowhere. He lay on his narrow mat for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar weight of inadequacy pressing down on his chest. He was failing. That was the thought that circled through his mind like a bird that could not land. He was failing at this practice, failing at this life he had chosen. The other monks seemed at peace, seemed to have found something that eluded him. Their faces were calm, their movements graceful. They spoke rarely, but when they did, their words carried weight and clarity. Tenzin felt like a fraud, like a child playing at being holy. He rose and dressed in the darkness, pulling on his robes with clumsy, cold fingers. Then he walked through the silent corridors to the meditation hall. He was early, the bell had not yet rung, and the hall was empty and dark. He felt his way to the stack of cushions, selected one, and placed it in his usual spot near the back of the hall. He sat down and closed his eyes. The silence was immense, pressing in from all sides. He tried to settle into his breath, tried to find the rhythm that was supposed to bring calm, but his mind would not cooperate. Thoughts rushed in like water through a broken dam. Worry about his practice, shame about his inadequacy, memories of his life before the monastery, the life he had walked away from, questions about whether he had made the right choice. He sat with it all, trying not to push the thoughts away, trying not to grasp at them, trying to simply observe, but the trying itself felt like another form of doing, another way he was failing to just be. Time passed. Other monks began to arrive, their footsteps soft on the wooden floor. They took their places in silence, settling onto their cushions with an ease that made Tenzin ache with envy. The hall filled slowly, bodies arranging themselves in rows, until finally the elder monk who led the morning meditation struck the bell. The sound rolled through the hall, deep and resonant, and in its wake came a stillness that felt almost physical. Tenzin tried to sink into it, tried to let the sound carry him, but he remained on the surface, separate, alone. The meditation lasted an hour. For Tenzin, it felt like an eternity. His knees ached, his back hurt. His mind cycled through the same patterns of worry and judgment, over and over, until he wanted to scream. But he sat. That was all he could do. Sit and breathe and try not to hate himself for how poorly he was sitting and breathing. When the bell finally rang to signal the end of the meditation, Tenzin stood with the others and filed out of the hall. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, a pale gray seeping into the darkness. The morning air was sharp and cold, and it stung his face and hands. The monks dispersed to their various morning tasks. Tenzin's assignment was to sweep the stone paths that wound through the monastery grounds. He collected his broom from the storage shed and began his work, starting at the main gate and working his way inward. The broom was old, its bristles worn uneven. He had used it 1,000 times, and his hands knew exactly where to grip it, how to angle it to catch the leaves and dust. He swept slowly, methodically, watching the pile of debris grow as he worked his way along the path. The repetition of the task was supposed to be meditative, another form of practice, but today it just felt like sweeping. His mind continued its endless commentary. You're not even sweeping mindfully. You're thinking about sweeping mindfully, which means you're not doing it. You're failing at this too. He paused and leaned on the broom, looking out at the mountains. They were emerging from the darkness now, their peaks catching the first hint of light. The sight was beautiful, objectively, but Tenzin felt nothing, just the same hollow restlessness, the same sense of being on the outside of his own life. He forced himself to continue sweeping. The path curved around the side of the main hall, past the garden where a few winter vegetables grew in raised beds, past the well with its wooden bucket and rope. He swept carefully around the well, gathering the fallen leaves that had collected at its base. As he worked, he became aware of a presence nearby. He looked up and saw the abbot standing at the edge of the garden, watching him. The abbot was an old man, 70 or perhaps older, his face deeply lined, his eyes sharp and clear. He said nothing, just stood there with his hands folded in his robes, observing. Tenzin felt a flush of shame. Of course, the abbot would choose this moment to watch him, this moment when he was sweeping badly, thinking too much, failing, He tried to focus on the broom, on the path, but he could feel the weight of the abbot's gaze. After a few minutes, the abbot walked over. He moved slowly, with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had grown fragile with age. He stopped a few feet from Tenzin and looked down at the pile of leaves and dust. "Good morning, Tenzin," the abbot said. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it carried perfectly in the still air. "Good morning, Venerable," Tenzin replied, bowing slightly. The abbot nodded. Then he said, "May I ask you something?" Tenzin's heart sank. Here it came, the question that would expose his failure, his lack of progress. "Of course, Venerable." "What are you sweeping?" the abbot asked. Tenzin blinked. "The path, Venerable. I'm sweeping the path." "Yes," the abbot said. "The path. And what else?" Tenzin looked down at the broom, confused. I don't understand, Venerable." The abbot smiled faintly. "When you sweep, what are you trying to remove?" "The leaves," Tenzin said. "The dust, the debris. And where does it go?" "I gather it and take it to the compost." "So the leaves return to the earth," the abbot said. "They become soil. They nourish the garden. They are not removed, only transformed." Tenzin nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. The abbot stepped closer. "Tell me, Tenzin, do you think your mind is different from this path?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Tenzin opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. My mind is full of debris, Venerable. Thoughts, worries, distractions. I try to sweep them away, but they keep coming back." "Of course they do," the abbot said, "just as the leaves keep falling, just as the dust keeps settling. This is not a problem to be solved, Tenzin. This is the nature of things. The question is not how to stop the leaves from falling. The question is, what do you do with them when they land?" Tenzin felt something shift in his chest, a small opening. I don't know, Venerable." The abbot reached down and picked up a single leaf from the pile Tenzin had swept. It was brown and brittle, curled at the edges. He held it up to the light, studying it. "This leaf," he said, "was once green. It grew on a tree, drew nourishment from the sun, danced in the wind. Then autumn came, and it changed color. Then it fell. And now it is here, on this path, waiting to return to the earth. At each stage, it was perfect, as a green leaf, as a golden leaf, as a fallen leaf. It did not fail when it changed. It simply continued." He handed the leaf to Tenzin. "You came here 3 years ago with a mind full of questions and fire. Now the fire has cooled, and you think you have failed. But perhaps you have not failed. Perhaps you have simply changed. Perhaps the green leaf has turned gold, and you are afraid of falling." Tenzin looked at the leaf in his hand. It was so light, so fragile, he could crush it with the slightest pressure. "But Venerable," he said quietly, "I don't feel like I'm making progress. I sit in meditation, and my mind wanders. I read the texts, and they feel empty. I work, and I feel like I'm just going through the motions." "Yes," the abbot said, "you are in winter. The tree looks dead, but it is not. It is resting. It is gathering strength for spring. This is not failure, Tenzin. This is the practice." "But what should I do?" Tenzin asked, and he heard the desperation in his own voice. The abbot looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Sweep the path, that is all. Not trying to sweep perfectly, not trying to become enlightened while sweeping, just sweeping. Feeling the broom in your hands, watching the leaves gather, breathing. This is the practice. Everything else is extra. He patted Tenzin gently on the shoulder, then turned and walked away, his footsteps slow and deliberate on the stone path. Tenzin stood there holding the leaf, watching the abbot disappear around the corner of the main hall. Then he looked down at the broom in his other hand. It was just a broom. The path was just a path. The leaves were just leaves. He set the leaf down gently at the base of a nearby tree, then picked up the broom and continued sweeping. But something had changed. He was not trying to sweep mindfully anymore. He was just sweeping, feeling the weight of the broom, hearing the soft scrape of bristles on stone, watching the pile grow. His mind still wandered. Thoughts still arose, but he noticed them differently now, not as failures, but as leaves falling, just part of the process. He did not try to push them away. He simply noted them and returned to the sweeping. The sun was higher now, warming the air slightly. The mountains glowed gold and pink in the morning light. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, its voice clear and sudden. Tenzin swept until the path was clean. Then he gathered the pile of debris and carried it to the compost area behind the garden. He scattered it over the dark, rich soil, watching as it settled among the decomposing vegetables and kitchen scraps. He stood there for a moment, looking at the heap. In a few months, all of this would be soil, and Hafen, the leaves, the scraps, the debris of daily life, all of it would transform into something that nourished growth. Nothing was wasted, nothing was lost. Everything simply changed form. He thought about what the abbot had said. "You are in winter. The tree looks dead, but it is not. It is resting." Perhaps, Tenzin thought, this hollow feeling, this sense of going through the motions, was not a failure but a necessary stage. Perhaps he had been trying too hard, expecting too much, grasping for some experience of enlightenment that would prove he was doing it right. And perhaps the practice was not about reaching some destination, but about being willing to stay, even in winter, even when everything felt cold and dormant. He walked back to the path and stood there, looking at the clean stones, the way they curved and disappeared around the corner. He had swept this path hundreds of times. He would sweep it hundreds more, and each time there would be leaves, each time there would be dust. This was not a problem. This was just what paths did. He felt, for the first time in months, a small flicker of peace. Not enlightenment, not some grand realization, just a tiny easing of the tightness in his chest. A sense that maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he needed to be. The day continued. Tenzin attended the midday meal, ate his rice and vegetables in silence with the community. He worked in the garden in the afternoon, pulling weeds, turning soil. He sat in meditation again in the evening, and his mind wandered, but he did not hate himself for it. He simply noted it and returned to his breath. That night, the community gathered for a special vigil to mark the turning of the year. They sat in the meditation hall from dusk until dawn, taking turns keeping watch, maintaining a continuous practice through the transition from old to new. Tenzin took his turn at midnight. The hall was dark except for a few candles on the altar. He sat on his cushion and listened to the silence, vast and deep. Outside, the world was utterly still. No wind, no animals, just the profound quiet of a mountain winter night. He sat and breathed. His mind wandered. He noticed and returned, wandered and returned. Over and over, the same cycle, the same practice. And somewhere in the depths of the night, sitting in the darkness, Tenzin had a small realization. It was not dramatic. There were no lights, no visions, no sudden understanding. Just a quiet recognition that this sitting, this breathing, this endless returning, this was it. This was the practice, not a means to some other end, but the thing itself. He was not failing, he was practicing. And practice meant showing up again and again, even when it felt hollow, even when nothing seemed to happen. Practice meant being willing to sit in winter and trust that spring would come when it was ready. The candles burned low, the darkness deepened, and Tenzin sat in the stillness, feeling the new year arrive not with fanfare but with the simple, steady rhythm of his breath. When his watch ended and another monk came to relieve him, Tenzin stood slowly and walked back to his cell. He lay down on his mat and closed his eyes. And for the first time in months, he slept deeply, dreamlessly, like a tree resting in winter, gathering strength for the spring to come. And somewhere not far from here, in a village where lanterns float on water, another story rises with the new year. There was a village called Lotus Bend that sat along the banks of a wide, slow river. The village had earned its name from the lotus flowers that bloomed in the shallows each summer, their pink and white petals opening to the sun. But in winter, the lotuses were gone, dormant beneath the mud, and the river ran dark and cold between its banks. The village was small, no more than 50 families, and everyone knew everyone. They knew each other's joys and sorrows, strengths and failings. They knew who could be counted on and who could not. They knew the patterns of each life as intimately as they knew the patterns of the river's flow. Among the villagers was a woman named Mai, who lived in a small house near the river with her elderly mother. Mai was 38 years old, unmarried, and had spent most of her life caring for others. First, her father, who had been ill for many years before his death. Then her mother, whose mind had begun to fade, whose memories had started to slip away like water through cupped hands. Mai worked as a seamstress, mending clothes and stitching new garments for the villagers. Her fingers were skilled, her stitches small and even. She worked long hours to support herself and her mother, and what little free time she had was spent preparing meals, cleaning the house, helping her mother dress and bathe. It was a quiet life, a small life, and Mai sometimes felt its smallness like a weight pressing on her chest. She had dreamed once of other things, of traveling to the city, of learning to paint, of falling in love and building a family of her own. But those dreams had faded with the years, worn down by duty and necessity and the simple grinding passage of time. On the last day of the year, Mai woke before dawn, as she always did. She rose from her sleeping mat and walked quietly through the house to check on her mother. The old woman was still asleep, her breathing soft and regular, her face peaceful in the dim light. Mai stood in the doorway for a moment, watching. Her mother's hair was completely white now, spread across the pillow like frost. Her hands, folded on her chest, were thin and veined, the skin almost translucent. She looked so small, so fragile, as if she might dissolve if touched too firmly. Mai felt the familiar tightness in her throat, the complicated knot of love and grief and exhaustion that she carried always. She did not know how much longer her mother would be with her. Weeks, months. The doctor had been vague, unhelpful. At her age, he had said, shrugging, it could be any time. She turned away and went to the kitchen. She built a fire in the small stove, watching the kindling catch and the flames lick upward. Then she filled a pot with water and rice and set it on the stove to cook. While she waited, she stood at the window and looked out at the river. The water was dark in the pre-dawn light, moving slowly past the village. Mist rose from its surface, curling and drifting in the cold air. On the far bank, trees stood like silent witnesses, their bare branches reaching toward the sky. Mai had lived by this river her entire life. She had learned to swim in its summer shallows, had washed clothes on its banks, had watched it flood and recede and freeze and thaw. The river was constant, unchanging in its change, always moving but always there. She thought about the new year that would begin tonight. In the village, it was traditional to celebrate by floating paper lanterns on the river, each lantern carrying a wish or a prayer into the darkness. The villagers would gather at sunset, light their lanterns, and set them on the water, watching as the current carried them downstream and out of sight. Mai had participated in this ritual every year for as long as she could remember. But this year, she found herself wondering what wish she could possibly make. What was there left to hope for? Her life was what it was: small, circumscribed, dutiful. The dreams of her youth felt impossibly distant, like stories she had heard about someone else. The rice finished cooking. Mai prepared 2 bowls, one for herself and one for her mother. She carried her mother's bowl to the bedroom and gently woke the old woman. "Good morning, Mother," she said softly. "It's time for breakfast." Her mother's eyes opened slowly. They were cloudy, unfocused. She looked at Mai without recognition. "Who are you?" the old woman asked, her voice thin and querulous. Mai felt the familiar stab of pain. This happened more and more often now, her mother forgetting who she was, forgetting where she was, forgetting the entire shape of her life. "I'm Mai, Mother," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Your daughter. I've brought you breakfast." The old woman frowned, suspicious, but she allowed Mai to help her sit up, to arrange the pillows behind her back. Mai placed the bowl in her hands and watched as she ate, slowly and carefully, her hands trembling slightly. When the meal was finished, Mai helped her mother wash and dress. It was a slow process, requiring patience. The old woman moved stiffly, her joints aching, and she became confused easily, forgetting what they were doing halfway through. But finally it was done, and Mai settled her mother in a chair by the window where she could look out at the river. The old woman sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the water with empty eyes. Mai turned to her own work. She had several garments to mend before the new year, and she settled at her small table with her needle and thread. The work was familiar, meditative. She worked slowly, carefully, repairing a torn hem, replacing a missing button, reinforcing a weak seam. As she stitched, her mind wandered. She thought about her life, about the years that had passed and the years that remained. She thought about the choices she had made to stay in the village, to care for her parents, to set aside her own dreams. Had they been the right choices? She did not know. They had felt inevitable at the time, the only possible path. But now, looking back, she wondered if there had been other options she simply had not seen. She thought about her mother, about the person she had been before the forgetting began. A strong woman, capable and kind. A woman who had raised 3 children, managed a household, tended a garden. A woman who had loved her husband fiercely and mourned him deeply when he died. All of that was fading now, dissolving like morning mist. Soon, Mai thought there would be nothing left. Her mother would become an empty vessel, breathing but not living. And then she would stop breathing altogether, and that would be the end. The thought was unbearable and also strangely inevitable. Mai had been preparing for it for years, steeling herself, but she knew that when the moment came, she would not be ready. How could anyone be ready for such a loss? She set down her sewing and walked to the window. Her mother was still sitting in her chair, still staring at the river. Mai stood beside her and looked out. "Do you remember the lanterns, Mother?" she asked softly. "How we used to light them on New Year's Eve?" The old woman did not respond. Her expression did not change. She might not have heard, or she might have heard but not understood. It was impossible to know. Mai felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away. Crying would not help. It never did. She returned to her sewing and worked through the afternoon. The light changed, grew softer, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the village preparing for the celebration. Children's voices, sharp and excited, the clatter of pots, the bark of a dog. When the light began to fade, Mai set aside her work and helped her mother into a warm coat. Then she wrapped herself in her own coat and led her mother outside. The old woman moved slowly, leaning heavily on Mai's arm, but she came without resistance. They walked down to the riverbank where the rest of the villagers were gathering. Lanterns were being prepared, small paper structures shaped like lotus flowers, fitted with candles. The air smelled of smoke and wax and the cold, clean scent of the river. Mai found a spot near the water and helped her mother sit on a flat stone. Then she went to collect 2 lanterns from the table where they were being distributed. The lanterns were beautiful, delicate, their paper walls painted with simple designs, flowers, birds, waves. She returned to her mother and knelt beside her. "Look, Mother," she said, "we'll light these and send them down the river, just like we always do." The old woman looked at the lanterns with blank eyes. She did not seem to understand. Mai lit her own lantern first, touching a match to the small candle inside. The flame caught, flickered, steadied. The lantern glowed softly, illuminating the painted flowers on its sides. She held it for a moment, feeling its warmth. According to tradition, she was supposed to make a wish before releasing it. She closed her eyes and tried to think of what to wish for. Health for her mother? But her mother was beyond health now, sliding inexorably toward an end that no wish could prevent. A different life for herself? But what would she wish for? To be younger, to have made different choices. That seemed like a betrayal of the life she had lived, the sacrifices she had made. She sat there with her eyes closed, the lantern warm in her hands, and felt a profound emptiness. She had no wishes, or perhaps she had too many, all of them impossible. Finally, she opened her eyes and looked at the lantern. The flame danced gently, casting shifting shadows, and suddenly she knew what her wish was. Not for her mother to get better, not for her life to be different. Just this, to have the strength to meet what comes, to be present for whatever remains, to not turn away from the grief when it arrives. She whispered the wish silently, then leaned forward and set the lantern on the water. It floated for a moment, rocking gently in the current, and then began to drift downstream. She watched it go, joining the dozens of other lanterns that were already moving down the river, a constellation of light flowing toward the darkness. She turned to her mother. "Your turn, Mother." She lit the second lantern and placed it in the old woman's hands. The old woman looked down at it, confused. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a lantern," Mai said gently. "For the new year, you make a wish and then you let it go." The old woman stared at the lantern. Then, to Mai's surprise, she smiled. It was a small smile, uncertain, but it transformed her face, brought a flicker of the person she had once been. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Yes," Mai said, "it is." They sat together in silence for a moment, the lantern glowing between them. Then the old woman leaned forward, very slowly, and placed the lantern on the water. It floated away, joining Mai's lantern and all the others. The two lights drifted side by side for a while, moving downstream, and Mai felt her throat tighten watching them, her lantern and her mother's, traveling together into the dark. The villagers around them were laughing, talking, calling out their wishes to each other. But Mai and her mother sat quietly, watching the lights disappear around the bend in the river. After a while, her mother turned to her. Her eyes were clearer than they had been all day. "Thank you," she said. Mai felt the tears come then, hot and sudden. "For what, mother?" "For being here," the old woman said. "For staying." Mai nodded, unable to speak. She took her mother's hand and held it, feeling the thin bones, the cool skin. They sat together as the darkness deepened and the stars began to appear. The lanterns were all gone now, carried away by the river, but their light remained in Mai's memory, glowing softly. She realized, sitting there, that her wish had already been granted. She had the strength to meet what comes. She was here, present, not turning away, and perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it had always been enough. When the celebration ended and the villagers began to disperse, Mai helped her mother to her feet and led her slowly home. She settled her into bed, pulled the blankets up to her chin. "Sleep well, mother," she whispered. "Sleep well, my daughter," the old woman replied, and her eyes closed. Mai stood in the doorway, watching her breathe, in and out, in and out. The new year had begun. What it would bring, she did not know. But she would meet it as she had met this day, with presence, with tenderness, with the quiet strength of simply showing up. She walked to her own sleeping mat and lay down. Outside, the river flowed on in darkness, carrying wishes downstream, always moving, always new. And there, where the forest meets the road and travelers pause between journeys, one more story waits to unfold. There was a tea house that stood at a crossroads deep in the forest, where three paths met and travelers from distant places would sometimes pause to rest. The tea house was small and simple, built of wood that had weathered to silver, with a thatched roof and a wide porch that overlooked the intersection. The tea house was tended by a man named Shen, who had lived there alone for 15 years. He was 53 years old, with gray streaked through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of smiling. He had come to the tea house as a young man, taking over the work from the previous keeper, an old woman who had decided it was time to walk into the forest and not return. Shen's life was simple and rhythmic. He rose before dawn each day and prepared the tea house for travelers. He swept the porch, aired the mats, lit the brazier, and set water to boil. Then he waited. Some days, many travelers came. Some days, none. It did not matter to Shen. He was simply there, ready to offer tea and rest to whoever arrived. The travelers who stopped were of all kinds. Merchants with heavy packs, pilgrims seeking sacred sites, families moving from one village to another, monks and nuns on wandering. Occasionally, someone running from something, though Shen never asked what. He greeted them all the same way, with a bow and a smile and an invitation to sit. He served them tea, good tea, prepared properly, and if they were hungry, he offered rice and simple vegetables. Some travelers talked, sharing their stories. Others sat in silence, resting. Shen listened or did not listen, whatever was needed. He asked for no payment, though travelers often left coins or small gifts. He accepted these with gratitude but did not depend on them. This was his practice: to be present, to serve, to let go. On the last day of the year, Shen woke in the darkness and lay still for a moment, listening to the forest. The trees were quiet, the wind gentle. In the distance, he could hear the hoot of an owl, a long, low call that echoed through the darkness. He rose and dressed, then stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold and sharp, scented with pine and earth. The sky above was clear, stars scattered thick across the darkness. He stood for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the cold fill his lungs. Then he set to work. He swept the porch, each stroke of the broom slow and deliberate. He wiped the low table where travelers sat. He checked the brazier, adding fresh charcoal. He filled the kettle with water from the well behind the tea house and set it on the brazier to heat. While the water warmed, he walked the 3 paths that met at the crossroads, checking for fallen branches or obstacles that might trouble a traveler in the dark. The paths were clear. The forest stood silent around him, patient and watchful. He returned to the tea house and prepared himself a simple breakfast rice porridge with a few preserved plums. He ate slowly, sitting on the porch, watching the sky begin to lighten in the east. As he ate, he thought about the year that was ending. It had been a year like many others. Travelers had come and gone. The seasons had turned. He had served tea, swept the porch, tended his small garden. There had been no great events, no dramatic moments, just the steady rhythm of days, each one offering its own small joys and small challenges. But there had been one thing different about this year. A heaviness had begun to settle into Shen's chest, a weight he could not quite name. It was not sadness, exactly, though there was sadness in it. It was more like a question he could not answer. A restlessness, a sense of incompleteness. He had been at the tea house for 15 years. He had served thousands of travelers. He had perfected his tea, learned the names of every plant in the forest, memorized the patterns of the seasons. And yet, he found himself wondering, was this enough? Had his life meant something? Or had he simply been going through the motions year after year, with no real purpose beyond the next cup of tea? The question troubled him. It felt like doubt, like a failing. He had chosen this life freely, had walked away from the busy world to live simply and serve quietly. He had thought he was at peace with that choice. But now, as the year ended and a new one prepared to begin, he felt uncertain. He finished his breakfast and washed his bowl. Then he sat on the porch and waited. The sun rose slowly, painting the forest in shades of gold and amber. Birds began to call, their voices bright in the morning air. The day warmed slightly, though the cold remained. No travelers came in the morning. Shen sat alone, drinking tea, watching the light move through the trees. He tried to meditate, to settle into stillness, but his mind would not quiet. The question circled endlessly. Has this been enough? Around midday, he heard footsteps on the eastern path. He stood and looked, and saw a figure approaching. As the figure drew closer, Shen could see it was a young woman, perhaps 25, with a travel pack on her back and mud on her boots. She looked tired, her face drawn, her shoulders slumped. "Welcome," Shen called out, bowing. "Please, come and rest." The woman climbed the steps to the porch and set down her pack with a sigh. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had not spoken in days. Shen gestured to the mat beside the table. Please sit, I'll bring tea. She sat heavily, wincing as if her muscles ached. Shen went inside and prepared a fresh pot of tea, one of his best blends, green tea with jasmine. He brought it out on a tray with 2 cups and a small plate of rice cakes. He poured for her first, then for himself. She wrapped her hands around the cup, breathing in the steam. "This smells wonderful," she said. "Thank you," Shen said. "Please, drink." She sipped, and he saw her face relax slightly, the tension easing. They sat in silence for a while. Shen did not ask where she was going or where she had been. He simply sat, present, available. After a while, the woman spoke. "I've been walking for 3 days," she said, trying to figure something out. Shen nodded but did not respond. He had learned long ago that people would share what they needed to share if given space. "I left my home," the woman continued. "Left my job, my family, everything. I couldn't stay anymore. It felt like I was suffocating, like my life was happening to someone else and I was just watching." She paused, took another sip of tea. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Maybe I am. I don't have a plan. I don't know where I'm going. I just knew I had to leave." Shen poured more tea into her cup. "And now?" he asked gently. She laughed, a bitter sound. "Now I'm sitting at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere, talking to a stranger, and I still don't have any answers." Shen smiled. "Perhaps that is the answer." She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "The not knowing," Shen said. "Perhaps that is not a problem to be solved, but a state to be experienced." The woman frowned. "But I can't just wander forever. Eventually I'll have to choose a direction, make a decision, build a new life." "Yes," Shen said. "Eventually. But not today. Today you are here. Today you are drinking tea. Today you are resting. That is enough for today." The woman looked down at her cup. "Is it really that simple?" "Simple," Shen said, "but not easy." They sat in silence again. The sun moved across the sky, casting long shadows from the trees. After a while, the woman stood. "Thank you," she said, "for the tea, for listening." "It was my pleasure," Shen said, bowing. She picked up her pack and adjusted the straps. Then she paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you know if you're on the right path?" Shen considered the question. It was the question he had been asking himself all day, all year, and suddenly, hearing it from someone else, he knew the answer. "You don't," he said simply. "You can't know. You can only walk, one step, then another, and trust that the path will reveal itself as you go." The woman nodded slowly. "One step at a time, one step at a time," Shen agreed. She smiled then, a genuine smile that softened her face. "Thank you." She descended the steps and stood at the crossroads, looking at the 3 paths. After a moment, she chose the western path and began to walk. Shen watched until she disappeared into the trees. When she was gone, he sat back down on the porch, and he realized, with a sudden clarity, that the question he had been carrying all year had been answered. Had his life meant something? He did not know. He could not know. But in this moment, he had offered rest to a weary traveler. He had listened. He had served tea, and perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it had always been enough. The day continued. Another traveler came in the late afternoon, an old man leading a donkey. Shen gave him tea and helped him tend to the animal. Then the old man continued on his way, heading north. As evening approached, Shen prepared a simple meal for himself. He ate on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The forest grew quiet, settling into the twilight. When full dark came, Shen lit a lantern and hung it on the porch. It glowed softly, a beacon for any traveler who might be walking the paths in darkness. Then he sat in the chair and looked up at the stars. The new year was beginning. He did not know what it would bring. More travelers, certainly. More tea. More moments of connection and moments of solitude. More questions. More small joys. More daily tasks. And that was enough. One day at a time, one cup of tea at a time, one moment of presence at a time, he whispered a quiet blessing to the year that was ending. Thank you for the travelers. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for showing me, again, that meaning is not found in grand gestures but in small acts of service. He sat on the porch as the night deepened, the lantern glowing beside him, and waited, always waiting, always ready, always beginning again. And in a city where bells ring and incense rises, another story begins with the turning year. There was a temple that stood in the heart of a bustling city, surrounded by narrow streets and crowded markets, the clamor of commerce and life pressing against its walls. The temple was old, its stones dark with soot and age, its wooden doors carved with images of lotus flowers and protective deities. It had stood in this place for 300 years, witnessing the city grow up around it, watching generations come and go like waves against a shore. Inside the temple lived a community of monks and nuns, perhaps 20 in all, who maintained the daily rhythms of prayer and service. They rang the bells at dawn and dusk, chanted sutras in the main hall, tended the small garden courtyard, and welcomed the city's residents who came to light incense and offer prayers. Among them was a nun named Sister Lan, who was 41 years old and had lived at the temple for 12 years. Before coming to the temple, she had been a teacher in a primary school, a woman with a husband and a small apartment and a life that looked, from the outside, perfectly ordinary. But inside, she had felt increasingly hollow, as if she were playing a role in someone else's story. The dissolution of her marriage had been quiet and mutual, both of them acknowledging what had long been true. They were companions but not partners, sharing space but not lives. After the divorce, Lan had continued teaching for a while, but the work that had once brought her joy felt mechanical, repetitive. She would stand in front of her classroom and hear her own voice as if from a great distance, saying words that no longer carried meaning. One day, walking home from school, she had passed the temple and heard the evening chanting drifting out into the street. The sound had stopped her in her tracks. She had stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by the rush of traffic and pedestrians, and listened, and something in her chest had cracked open. She had returned the next day, and the day after that. Eventually, she had asked to speak with the abbess, and 6 months later, she had shaved her head, taken her vows, and moved into a small room on the temple's second floor. The years since had been both harder and easier than she had expected. The physical discipline, the early rising, the simple food, the hours of sitting meditation had been difficult at first but had become natural over time. The letting go of possessions, of privacy, of personal choice in small matters had been surprisingly freeing. But the inner work, the examination of her own mind and heart, remained challenging. She had thought, naively, that leaving the world behind would mean leaving her ego behind as well. But she had discovered that the ego came with her, tucked into her robes, whispering its familiar stories. You're not doing this right. You're not as devoted as the others. You're still attached to comfort, to recognition, to the idea of being special. On the last day of the year, Sister Lan woke to the sound of the dawn bell, its deep tone reverberating through the temple. She rose from her sleeping mat and dressed in the darkness, pulling on her gray robes, wrapping her kasaya around her shoulders. Then she walked downstairs to join the community in the main hall for morning chanting. The hall was dim, lit by candles on the altar. The other monastics were already settling onto their cushions, their faces serene in the flickering light. Sister Lan took her place near the back and folded her hands in prayer position. The chanting began, voices rising together in the ancient syllables. Sister Lan joined in, her voice blending with the others, the words flowing through her without thought. She had chanted these same verses thousands of times, knew them so deeply they lived in her body, in her breath. But this morning, her mind was restless. The new year was coming, and with it, a decision she had been avoiding. The abbess had asked her, several weeks ago, if she would be willing to take on more responsibility in the temple, to help train the newer monastics, to lead some of the public teachings, to serve as a bridge between the community and the city beyond the walls. It was an honor, Sister Lan knew, a recognition of her years of practice, her steadiness, but it also frightened her. She had come to the temple to escape the world of performance and expectation, and now she was being asked to step back into a version of that world, not teaching school children, but teaching Dharma, not managing a classroom, but managing relationships and responsibilities. She had told the abbess she would think about it, but thinking had led only to more thinking, a spiral of doubt and analysis that went nowhere. Part of her wanted to say yes, felt called to the work, but another part resisted, wanted to remain in the comfortable anonymity of the practice. Just one voice in the chorus, one body among many. The chanting ended. The community sat in silence for a moment, then stood and filed out of the hall to their various morning duties. Sister Lan's task was to tend the incense offerings in the public prayer room. She walked through the courtyard, feeling the cold morning air on her face. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds. The garden was dormant, the plants cut back for winter, the small pond covered with a thin film of ice. The prayer room was at the front of the temple, accessible from the street. It was a simple space with an altar, a statue of Kuan Yin, the Bodhisattva of compassion, and racks for incense and candles. Throughout the day, people from the city would come to light incense and offer prayers. It was Sister Lan's job to keep the space clean, to replenish the incense when it ran low, to maintain the candles. She entered the room and found it empty. She began her work, sweeping the floor, wiping the altar, arranging fresh incense in the holders. As she worked, she heard the city waking beyond the temple walls, the rumble of traffic, the shout of vendors setting up their stalls, the clatter of shutters being opened. The city had always felt far away when she was inside the temple. The walls created a barrier, a separation between the sacred and the mundane. But now, listening to the sounds, Sister Lan wondered if that separation was real or just something she had constructed in her mind. The abbess's request felt like an invitation to dissolve that barrier, to recognize that the temple was not separate from the city but part of it. That practice was not about escaping the world but about engaging with it differently. But that thought terrified her, because if there was no separation, if the temple was not a refuge from the world, then where could she go? What had she been doing here for 12 years? She paused in her sweeping, leaning on the broom. The doubt was so familiar, so persistent. Always the same questions, the same fears, dressed in different forms. The door to the prayer room opened, and an old woman entered. She was stooped and small, dressed in a faded blue coat, a scarf wrapped around her head. She approached the altar slowly, her steps careful, and selected 3 sticks of incense. Sister Lan watched as the woman lit the incense from one of the candles, then held the sticks in both hands and bowed 3 times. Her lips moved in silent prayer. Then she placed the incense in the holder and bowed again. As she turned to leave, she noticed Sister Lan and smiled. "Happy New Year, sister," she said, her voice soft and warm. "Happy New Year," Sister Lan replied, bowing. The old woman paused. "I come here every week," she said. "Have done for 20 years. This temple has been such a blessing to me." Sister Lan felt a sudden tightness in her throat. "I'm glad," she managed to say. "You all do such important work," the woman continued, "making space for people like me to come and pray, to remember what's important, to feel less alone." She bowed again, then shuffled toward the door. As she reached it, she turned back. "May the new year bring you peace, sister." "And you," Sister Lan said. When the woman was gone, Sister Lan stood very still. The incense the woman had lit was burning, thin threads of smoke rising toward the ceiling. The scent was sweet and woody, filling the room. Sister Lan looked at the statue of Kuan Yin. The Bodhisattva's face was serene, her eyes half closed, her hand raised in a gesture of blessing. She embodied compassion, the willingness to remain in the world of suffering in order to help others find freedom. And suddenly, Sister Lan understood. She had been thinking about the abbess's request all wrong. She had been framing it as a choice between her practice and the world, between solitude and service, between peace and responsibility. But those were false oppositions. The practice was not about withdrawing from the world. It was about being present in the world with an open heart. Service was not a distraction from meditation. It was meditation made manifest. That old woman had come to the temple seeking comfort, connection, a reminder of something beyond the daily grind. And the temple had provided that, not because the temple was separate from the city, but because it held space within the city for reflection and prayer. And Sister Lan's role, if she accepted the abbess's request, would be to help maintain and expand that space, to guide others in their practice, to teach what she had learned, not because she had achieved some perfect understanding, but precisely because she was still learning, still struggling, still human. The realization settled into her chest, heavy and light at the same time. She was afraid. That fear would not go away. But perhaps fear was not a reason to refuse. Perhaps it was simply another thing to notice, to acknowledge, and to work with. She finished her cleaning and stood before the altar. She lit 3 sticks of incense of her own and held them in her palms. Then she bowed, once, twice, 3 times. She did not pray for the fear to go away. She did not pray for certainty or clarity. She simply offered gratitude for the temple, for the community, for the old woman who had reminded her why she was here, for the abbess who saw something in her worth cultivating. She placed the incense in the holder and watched the smoke rise. Then she walked across the courtyard to find the abbess. The abbess was in her small office, a simple room with a desk and a few shelves of books. She looked up when Sister Lan entered and smiled. "Good morning, Sister Lan." "Good morning, abbess." Sister Lan bowed. "I've been thinking about your request." The abbess set down her pen. "And?" Sister Lan took a breath. "I'm afraid." she said. "I'm afraid I'm not ready. I'm afraid I'll fail. I'm afraid of stepping into a role that feels too big for me." The abbess nodded. "Yes, those are all good reasons to say yes." Sister Lan blinked. "What if you felt completely ready?" the abbess said. "If you had no fear, no doubt, then I would worry. It would mean you hadn't understood the weight of the responsibility. The fact that you're afraid means you're taking it seriously, and that's exactly what we need." Sister Lan felt something loosen in her chest. "So you think I should do it?" "I think," the abbess said gently, "that you're already doing it. You've been teaching by example for years. Now I'm simply asking you to teach more explicitly, to share what you've learned, to help others the way this community has helped you." Sister Lan was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I accept. I'll do my best." The abbess smiled. "That's all any of us can do." They sat together in silence for a while. Outside, the city hummed and clattered. Inside, the temple held its quiet space, not separate from the noise but making room for stillness within it. When Sister Lan returned to her duties, she felt different. Not transformed, not suddenly confident, just slightly more settled. She had said yes. She had stepped forward, and whatever came next, she would meet it one moment at a time. That evening, the temple held a New Year ceremony. The community gathered in the main hall, along with dozens of visitors from the city. They chanted together, offered incense together, listened to a teaching from the abbess about impermanence and new beginnings. And when midnight came and the new year arrived, they rang the temple bell 108 times, each strike resonating through the building, through the city, through the night. Sister Lan stood in the courtyard and listened to each strike. With each one, she released a little more of her fear, her doubt, her resistance. Not completely, she knew they would return, but enough to make space for what was coming. The last note faded into silence. The crowd began to disperse. Sister Lan remained in the courtyard, looking up at the sky. The clouds had cleared, and stars were visible, bright and distant. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for success or ease, but for courage, for the willingness to show up, day after day, and offer what she could, to begin again, always beginning again. And somewhere far from the city, in a place where snow falls soft and deep, another story settles into stillness. There was a monastery that stood in a high mountain valley, accessible only by a narrow footpath that wound through pine forests and over rocky passes. The monastery was remote, isolated, visited by few except the monks who lived there and the occasional pilgrim willing to make the difficult journey. The monastery housed 12 monks, all of them committed to a life of deep practice and minimal contact with the outside world. They lived simply, growing what food they could in the short summer months, preserving and storing for the long winters. They meditated for hours each day, studied the ancient texts, maintained silence except during designated times. Among them was a monk named Dorje, who was the youngest of the community at 32 years old. He had come to the monastery 7 years ago, drawn by stories of its intensity, its purity of practice. He had expected to find enlightenment in this place, or something close to it. He had expected the isolation to strip away all the noise and distraction of ordinary life, leaving only clarity. But 7 years had passed, and clarity had not come. Instead, there had been long stretches of boredom, of physical discomfort, of mental agitation that seemed to intensify rather than diminish in the silence. There had been moments of peace, yes, brief openings when everything felt aligned and true, But those moments were rare and fleeting, and they left Dorje wondering if he was doing something wrong, if there was some key to the practice that he had failed to grasp. On the last day of the year, Dorje woke to find the monastery blanketed in fresh snow. It had fallen during the night, silent and heavy, covering everything in white. The world outside his window was transformed, unfamiliar. The familiar shapes of buildings and trees rendered strange and beautiful beneath their white burden. He dressed in layers, wool undergarments, his robes, a heavy coat, and joined the other monks in the meditation hall. The hall was unheated, and their breath rose in small clouds. They sat on their cushions, wrapped in blankets, and meditated in the cold stillness. Dorje tried to settle into his practice, to follow his breath, to let thoughts arise and pass without grasping. But his mind was restless, caught in a familiar loop of self-judgment. 7 years. And what did he have to show for it? He was no closer to enlightenment than when he had arrived. He still struggled with desire, with aversion, with the endless chatter of his thinking mind. The meditation seemed to last forever. When the bell finally rang to signal its end, Dorje stood stiffly, his legs numb, his back aching. The other monks filed out silently, but Dorje lingered, looking at the empty hall, the rows of cushions, the simple altar with its single candle. He felt a sudden wave of despair. What was he doing here? What was the point of all this sitting, all this silence, if it led nowhere? He walked outside into the snow. The cold air hit his face like a slap, sharp and clarifying. He stood on the monastery steps and looked out at the valley. It was utterly silent, the snow muffling all sound. The pine trees stood dark against the white ground, their branches heavy with snow. The mountains rose around the valley like walls, enclosing this small pocket of the world. Dorje began to walk. He had no destination in mind, just a need to move, to escape the suffocating sense of failure that pressed down on him. He walked out past the monastery gate, following a path that led to a grove of trees where the monks sometimes went for walking meditation. The snow was deep, coming up past his ankles, and walking was difficult, but he pushed through, his breath coming hard, his body warming with the effort. The trees closed around him, their branches creating a canopy overhead. Snow continued to fall, soft and steady, landing on his shoulders, his head melting against his warm skin. He walked for perhaps 20 minutes deeper into the grove until he came to a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a single tree, larger than the others, its trunk thick and gnarled, its branches spreading wide. The tree was ancient, had probably stood in this spot for centuries. Dorje stopped and looked at the tree. Snow covered every branch, every twig, transforming it into something almost sculptural, more white than brown, more light than wood. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. He approached the tree and stood beneath it, looking up into its branches. The snow continued to fall, silent and steady, each flake distinct and perfect, each one disappearing into the white mass that covered the ground. And standing there, looking up, Dorje had a moment of clarity. Not the enlightenment he had been seeking, not some dramatic shift in consciousness, just a simple recognition. The tree did not try to be anything other than what it was. It did not strive to grow faster or straighter. It did not judge itself for its crooked branches or its rough bark. It simply stood, rooted in the earth, reaching toward the sky, allowing the snow to fall on it, allowing the seasons to move through it. And perhaps, Dorje thought, That was the practice, not to achieve some state of perfection, but to simply be, to stand in his life, rooted in his intention, and allow whatever arose to arise. To stop measuring himself against some imagined ideal and instead to accept where he was, who he was, in this moment. He had spent 7 years trying to become enlightened, but maybe the trying itself was the problem. Maybe enlightenment was not something to achieve, but something to allow. A recognition that he was already complete, already whole, even in his confusion and doubt. He reached out and placed his hand on the tree's trunk. The bark was rough beneath his palm, cold and real. He stood there for a long time, hand on the tree, snow falling around him, and felt something shift. Not a dramatic transformation, but a gentle easing, a sense of coming home to himself. When he finally turned to walk back to the monastery, he felt lighter. The despair had not disappeared completely, but it had loosened its grip. He was still the same person, still carrying the same struggles, but he was carrying them differently, with a little more gentleness, a little more acceptance. He walked back through the snow, his footprints from the outward journey already being filled in by the fresh snow. By tomorrow, they would be gone completely, erased, as if he had never walked this way at all, and that too felt right. Nothing permanent, nothing fixed, just constant change, constant renewal. When he reached the monastery, the other monks were gathering for the midday meal. Dorje joined them, taking his place at the long table. They ate in silence, as was their custom. But Dorje felt more connected to the community than he had in months. They were all here together, all struggling in their own ways, all trying to practice, all falling short and beginning again. After the meal, Dorje approached the abbot, an old monk with a face like weathered stone and eyes that saw everything. "May I speak with you, Rinpoche?" Dorje asked. The abbot nodded and led him to a small room off the main hall. They sat on cushions facing each other. "I've been struggling," Dorje said. "For a long time, I came here seeking enlightenment, but I don't feel any closer to it than when I arrived. I wonder if I'm wasting my time, if I should leave, try a different path." The abbot was silent for a moment. Then he said, "What do you think enlightenment is?" Dorje hesitated. "Peace, clarity, freedom from suffering." "And do you think those things are separate from your life right now?" "Yes," Dorje said. "I still suffer. My mind is not peaceful. I'm not free." The abbot smiled faintly. "The snow that is falling outside, is it struggling to be snow?" "No." "The tree that grows in the grove, is it trying to be a tree?" "No." "Then why are you trying to be enlightened?" Dorje felt the words land like stones in still water. I don't understand." "You are already what you are," the abbot said. "A human being, practicing, struggling, doubting, seeking. This is your enlightenment. Not some future state you will achieve, but this, right here, right now. The question is not how to become enlightened, but whether you can accept what you already are." Dorje sat with this, feeling it settle into his bones. "So the practice is acceptance," the abbot said. "Not resignation, but true acceptance of the struggle, the doubt, the imperfection. And then, from that acceptance, action, practice, sitting, walking, living, not to become something else, but to be fully what you are." Dorje nodded slowly. It was exactly what the tree had shown him. "Thank you, Rinpoche." That evening, the monastery held a simple ceremony to mark the new year. The 12 monks gathered in the meditation hall and sat in a circle. They each spoke a few words, sharing reflections on the year that had passed and intentions for the year to come. When it was Dorje's turn, he said, "This year, I will practice acceptance. I will try to be the tree in the snow, rooted and present, allowing what comes." The others nodded. Then they sat in silence together as midnight approached and the new year arrived. Dorje sat and breathed. His mind wandered. He noticed and returned. His body ached. He noticed and stayed. This was the practice, this endless returning, this willingness to begin again. When the ceremony ended and the monks dispersed to their rooms, Dorje stepped outside one last time. The snow had stopped falling. The sky had cleared, and stars filled the darkness, more stars than he had ever seen, thick and bright and impossibly distant. He stood in the snow and looked up, and he felt, for a moment, perfectly at peace, not because he had achieved anything, but because he had stopped trying to achieve, not because he had become enlightened, but because he had accepted that he was exactly where he needed to be. The new year had begun. Tomorrow, he would wake and sit and struggle and doubt. But tonight, right now, in this moment, he was simply here, and that was enough. And in one final place, where the desert meets the sky and silence stretches wide, the last story comes to rest. There was a hermit who lived in a cave at the edge of a vast desert, where the red rocks rose in strange formations and the sky was so big it seemed to curve at the edges. The hermit's name was no longer remembered, even by himself. He had left behind his old name along with his old life, and in the years of solitude, he had become simply the hermit, or sometimes the old one. He had lived in the cave for more than 20 years. He could not say exactly how long time had lost its meaning in the desert, where one day looked much like the next, and the seasons changed so subtly that their passage was measured more in the quality of light than in any dramatic shift. The hermit had come to the desert after a great loss. He had been a husband, a father, a man with responsibilities and relationships and a place in the world. But death had come, sudden and merciless, and taken his wife and daughter in a single night. A fire, they said, an accident. In the aftermath, the hermit had tried to continue. He had gone through the motions, attended to his duties, accepted the condolences of neighbors, but inside, he had been hollowed out, a shell moving through the world with nothing inside. After a year, he had simply walked away. He had left his house, his possessions, everything that tied him to his old life. He had walked into the desert carrying nothing but a water skin and a blanket. And he had kept walking until he found this cave, this place where the world fell away and there was nothing but rock and sky and silence. For the first years, he had done nothing but grieve. He had sat in the cave and wept, had screamed into the emptiness, had raged against the injustice of it all. The desert had absorbed it all, offering no answers, no comfort, just endless space for his pain. Gradually, the rage had burned itself out, the tears had dried, and in their place had come a kind of emptiness that was not quite peace but was at least bearable. He had learned to survive in the desert, to find water in hidden springs, to eat sparingly from the tough plants that grew in the rocks. He had learned to live with the silence, to let it become his companion rather than his enemy. But even after 20 years, the grief remained. It had changed shape, become less acute, but it was still there, a weight he carried always. On the last day of the year, though, the hermit did not know it was the last day of the year, for he had long ago stopped marking time. He woke before dawn and climbed to the top of the rock formation above his cave. This was his daily practice, to greet the sunrise from this high place, to watch the light spill across the desert. He sat cross-legged on the warm rock and waited. The sky was still dark, the stars beginning to fade. The desert stretched out below him, a vast expanse of sand and stone that seemed to go on forever. As he sat, he became aware of a presence beside him. He turned and saw a figure sitting on the rock a few feet away. A woman, young, with long dark hair and a familiar face. His daughter. The hermit's breath caught. He knew this was not real, that grief and solitude had finally broken his mind. But the vision was so clear, so vivid. She looked exactly as she had the last time he saw her, the night before the fire, 14 years old, on the cusp of becoming who she would be. "Hello, Father," she said, and her voice was the voice he had carried in his memory for 20 years. "You're not real," the hermit said, his voice rough from disuse. "Does that matter?" she asked, smiling. He did not know how to answer. He looked at her, drinking in the sight of her face, and felt the grief rise up fresh and fierce. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." She shook her head. "There was nothing to save me from. What happened, happened. It was not your fault. I should have been there. I should have." "You've carried this for 20 years, she said gently. "Don't you think it's time to put it down?" "I can't," he said. "If I let go of the grief, I let go of you." "No," she said. "The grief is not me. I am not the fire or the loss or the pain. I am the 14 years we had together. I am the mornings we watched the sunrise. I am the stories you told me before bed. I am the love between us. That doesn't end when the grief ends." The hermit felt tears on his face, hot and sudden. "I don't know how to let go." "You don't have to know how," she said. "You just have to be willing to open your hands and let the weight fall away." She stood and walked to the edge of the rock. The sky was lightening now, the first hint of dawn touching the horizon. She turned back to him. "Watch the sunrise, Father. Not for me, not in memory of me, but for yourself. Let yourself feel the beauty of it without the weight of loss. Let yourself begin again." And then she was gone, as suddenly as she had appeared. The hermit was alone on the rock, the desert stretching silent around him. He sat very still, tears still streaming down his face. His hands were clenched in fists, holding tight to the grief, as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. And then, slowly, he opened his hands. He let them rest on his knees, palms up, empty. The sun broke over the horizon. Light flooded the desert, painting the rocks in shades of gold and amber and rose. The hermit watched as the world transformed, as the darkness gave way to day, and he felt something shift. The grief was still there. He knew it would always be there in some form. But it was no longer the only thing. There was also this, the warmth of the sun on his face, the beauty of the light, the vast open space of the desert, the fact that he was still alive, still breathing, still capable of witnessing this moment. He had spent 20 years living in the past, in the moment of loss, but the loss was not happening now. Now, there was only this sunrise, this breath, this beating heart. He stayed on the rock as the sun climbed higher. He watched the shadows shorten, felt the air warm, and slowly, carefully, he allowed himself to feel something other than grief. He allowed himself to feel gratitude for the years he had had with his wife and daughter, for the love they had shared, for the fact that he had known them at all. and he allowed himself to feel hope. Not hope for anything specific, but just the general possibility that life could still hold moments of beauty, moments of connection, moments that mattered. When the sun was fully up, the hermit climbed down from the rock and returned to his cave. He gathered his few belongings, his blanket, his water skin, a small knife, a bowl. Then he stood at the entrance to the cave and looked out at the desert. He had lived here for 20 years, using the isolation as a way to avoid the world, to hide from the pain of living. But hiding had not healed him. It had only preserved the wound. It was time to leave. Time to walk back toward the world, not because the grief was gone, but because he was ready to carry it differently, to carry it as part of his story, not the whole of it. He did not know where he would go. Perhaps to a town, perhaps to another hermitage, perhaps simply into the desert to wander. It did not matter. What mattered was the willingness to move, to begin again, to step forward. He set out walking as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The desert stretched before him, vast and empty and full of possibility. His shadow stretched long behind him, growing shorter as the day progressed. He walked all day, stopping only to drink from his water skin and rest in the shade of rocks. As evening approached, he saw in the distance a small settlement, a cluster of buildings where smoke rose from cooking fires. He walked toward it, uncertain what he would find but willing to see. And as the sun set behind him, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, he felt something he had not felt in 20 years. He felt ready to speak to other people, ready to share his story, ready to listen to theirs, ready to discover that he was not alone in his suffering, that loss was a human thing, that others had found ways to carry it and still live. The new year had begun, though he did not know it. But beginnings do not wait for calendars. They happen in moments of choice, moments of opening, moments when we finally put down what we have been carrying and take a step forward. The hermit walked into the settlement as darkness fell. Someone saw him coming and called out a greeting. He raised his hand in response, and he began again. And now, dear traveler, through these stories, we arrive at the end of this long night of telling. 6 tales of beginning again, 6 ways of meeting the new year. The young monk learning that practice is not perfection but presence. The woman floating lanterns with her mother, finding strength in staying. The tea house keeper discovering meaning in small acts of service. The nun accepting her calling to teach. The mountain monk releasing the burden of achievement. The hermit finally ready to return to the world. Each one beginning again in their own way. Not because they had solved their problems or found perfect clarity, but because they were willing to take the next step, to open their hands, to trust the process. And perhaps you, too, are ready to begin again. Not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect, but now, in this breath, in this moment of rest. The new year is here, or it is coming, or perhaps it has already passed while you were listening. It does not matter, because every moment is a new year. Every breath is a fresh start. Every heartbeat is another chance to begin. You do not need to have it all figured out. You do not need to be ready. You only need to be willing. So rest now. Let these stories settle into your bones. Let your body soften into sleep. And when you wake, whenever that is, meet the day with gentle curiosity, with beginner's mind, with the understanding that you are exactly where you need to be. The year is turning, the wheel spins, and you are part of that great turning, that endless cycle of death and birth, of letting go and beginning again. Sleep well, friend, sleep deeply, and wake when you are ready to the beautiful, impossible task of being alive. May you begin again and again and again. Rest now.